So as I said, we're going to start off with heat pump basics, then go to costs and incentives and design considerations, and then we'll have time for your questions at the end. So Green Energy Consumers is a 40-year-old organization. We started as a heating oil buyers group, and we now do everything from wind power to solar power to electric vehicles and heat pumps. And we have a strong advocacy organization in both Massachusetts and Rhode Island. We welcome you. We started as an oil buyers co-op, and if you do heat with oil, we can still provide that service as well. Mike, do you want to introduce yourself and Abode Energy Management?
Yeah, certainly. Hi, my name is Mike Simons. I'm with Abode Energy Management. If you do end up scheduling a heat pump consultation with Green Energy's Consumers Alliance, I would be the person helping you kind of navigate your home's performance and kind of overlapping that with some kind of different options to hopefully migrate you away from fossil fuels with the adoption of air source heat pumps. Just previously in the past, I've trained a lot of mass save energy specialists, but really for the last 3 years, the majority of my work's been all about kind of just like understanding heat pumps, understanding their applications, and just really overlapping it with New England's rather tricky building stock. Yeah, and I'll be monitoring the questions as they come in kind of throughout the training. So I'll be likely, if anything comes up about heat pumps and you don't want to wait for the question and answer session at the end, just put a question in and I'll get to it.
Great, thank you, Mike. And I think we might as well turn off our cameras for the near term because I think it'll make it easier for people to see the slides. Just to say how excited we are about partnering with Abode, we think that the cat's meow. The heat pump market is still really new, and consumers need a little extra protection at this point, and there's a lot of information that we all need to take in to understand how heat pumps work and what the considerations are for your home. So our goal really is to move the heat pump market by providing customer information and by giving consumers better access to trusted, unbiased information. There are 3 parts of our program with Abode. One is the referrals to trusted heat pump installers. That's a free service. You just register on our site at this URL, and then you can click through, put in your zip code, and you'll get the installers in your area. That's mostly for Eastern Massachusetts. At present, we welcome installers from outside that area, but so far we haven't been able to get a cohort together outside of Eastern Massachusetts. We do offer a discount through Abode for their quote comparison report. This is really invaluable because it allows you to see an unbiased comparison of up to 3 quotes side by side, rated on all sorts of different metrics. So that is really valuable. And their virtual consultations, also discounted for people who come in through our site, are also very useful. You'd be talking with Mike, you'd have up to an hour. You could talk about all the specifics of your home. And again, unbiased professional advice, allowing you to get some perspective that you can really trust. So please check out our website for more details. And note that these discounted fees do have, they drop off at some point, or they will increase at some point, and I can't remember exactly when that is, but it is this fall. Heads up for that. You want to schedule soon, that's what I'm saying. So on to heat pump basics. Mike, can you tell us what is a heat pump and how do they work?
Yeah, certainly. So with a heat pump, I think that a lot of, just to kind of begin to understand how they work, it's actually found in the name. So a heat pump works by pumping energy from one location to another. So an example of this that's commonly used is talking about your refrigerator or your freezer. How that contraption works, or how that appliance works, it takes the heat from inside of the box and it pumps that heat to the outside of the box, which would be into your kitchen. So let's just say, for example, that you have your kitchen 70 degrees. You want your freezer to be 28 degrees. How a heat pump works in your freezer is they'll have really, really, really cold refrigerant. Let's say negative 15-degree refrigerant inside of there. It takes hot goes to cold, so say the 30-degree air inside of your refrigerator goes into that very cold refrigerant, and then it pumps that heat to the outside. And along the way, it pressurizes it and makes it hot, and that's how the hot air, that's how the heat from inside of the box goes to the outside of the box. The same exact technology works with a window AC. How that works is it just takes the heat inside of your home as well as some of the humidity inside of the home, and it pumps that energy and it dumps it to the outside. So if you're standing on the outside of a window AC, it will feel hot on the other end. So with a heat pump, it's the same exact technology, but it's able to do heating as well as cooling. So in the winter time, it may not seem like there's a lot of energy in the outside air if it's 0 degrees outside, but it is important to realize that 0 degrees outside is a lot warmer than negative 50 degrees outside. There's still a lot of energy that could be pulled out of that outside air and brought into the home. So unlike with fossil fuel-based systems where you're setting things on fire and just trying to capture that energy, with a heat pump, you're just using electricity to move energy from one location to another. And instead of a heating system being like 60% efficient, it ends up being, over the course of the year, around 250 to 300% efficient. So it's really cool, exciting stuff, and it's helping people migrate away from fossil fuels.
Great. And just like your refrigerator doesn't have a place where it actually is bringing your air, into the fridge and then pushing it out again. There's no air exchange between the inside and the outside with the heat pump. It's just the refrigerant that comes inside and goes outside, right?
Yep, you got it. Yep, so it's all just happening through like thin copper tubes is kind of what's moving the energy from one location to another. And the type of refrigerant that they're using is called R410A.
Great. So just to recap, heat pumps don't generate the heat. They're just moving it, just like these water pumps are not making water. They're just moving it from one place to the next. And I'll go on to the next slide if you're ready, Mike.
Yep.
Tell us about how efficient heat pumps are.
Yeah, so heat pumps change efficiency depending on what the outside temperature is. So let's say there's 47 degrees outside, there's a lot more energy in the outside air than if it was, say, 0 degrees outside. So one of the things to note is that, say, as the temperature drops, the efficiency of the heat pump drops. But for most models, most like single zone and multi-zone, they kind of are typically kind of on the scale of anywhere from like, say, 400% efficient, or having a coefficient of performance of 4 in kind of the more moderate temperatures, but then down to, say, the single digits, even into sub-zero temperatures, they still end up being pretty much over 175% efficient. So there is, so compared to traditional systems, much more efficient. Other things to know in terms of heat pumps is there's a variety of different types. So we saw a photo before of a ductless unit, and that's typically the most common in our region, where you can just be putting them on a wall or on a floor, and it's really easy to retrofit most homes with 1 or 2 ductless units, and then you could even possibly be displacing a large amount of your kind of fossil fuel use on the shoulder season. So sometimes when people are adopting heat pumps, they're kind of trying to do completely migrate away from fossil fuels. Other times when people are adopting heat pumps, they end up kind of getting a delightful cooling solution and then kind of don't need to turn on their actual heating system until January, because you can just use the heat pumps as a partial home solution when it's kind of more moderate out.
Great. And there are ground source heat pumps. That's also called geothermal. but we're focusing tonight on the ductless models because those are um, the more common. So let's look at some of the variations of what the ductless heads might look like. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, so on the left-hand side, what we have is probably the most common type where it's just a standard wall-mounted unit. So how that unit works is it's just going to be kind of pulling in the air that from the top of the unit, conditioning it, and then blowing it down. One of the things that I'll be addressing in the comments uh, is it sounds like marketing, but these units are inverter driven, they're modulating. So they never stop kind of blowing and mixing the air inside of the room when they're running. So whenever you're calling for heating, it's just kind of constantly taking the air into the room and it's constantly blowing it over the coil and it's constantly dumping the heat into the room or removing heat and dumping it to the outside. So for a lot of homes, it can end up becoming a lot more comfortable than what people are used to with their central heating system, where you have one thermostat or two thermostats and you're dealing with day and night and north and south, and there's always going to be kind of temperature imbalances. In the middle, what we see is a floor mounted unit. And what's nice about floor mounted units is one, you can kind of have all the lines that's just dropping down through the basement and out of the house. Another thing that's really nice about floor mounted units is you don't have to get up on a chair or a step ladder to change the filter. And floor mounted units can also be like tucked behind like a little desk so that you can kind of mask them a lot more. And then they also have ceiling mounted units where it's exactly as it looks. It's just kind of mounted, recessed into the ceiling. A handful of manufacturers are making that type as well now.
Great. And you mentioned changing the filters. This is something that, because it's blowing air, the heat pump head is constantly cleaning, the dust, et cetera, out of your air. So you do need to just, rinse those in water and let it dry, and then put it back in. Um, maybe monthly during the winter, but I have one, and I've certainly left it for a whole quarter from time to time. And the ceiling cassettes, some of them need to be accessed from an attic above, but some of them can be installed just from below as well. What about the outdoor unit, the compressor, Mike? What's the space needs on that and other considerations?
Yeah, so with the outdoor unit, there's a few different things to know. So over on the left-hand side, let me just say that that unit looks big. And that unit looks big because that home has a pretty big heating load. On the right-hand side, we see photos of, say, like a medium-sized unit and a smaller size unit. So do know that with the outdoor units, as far as spacing, it really does depend a lot about what the heating load as well as the cooling load is for the property. Another thing to be keeping in mind is that we're in Massachusetts, we're not in Bermuda, so we do need to deal with snow. So that's why on both of the photos we do see the equipment up on stands. Sometimes people are also mounting it on the side of the house. As far as the outdoor equipment, in my opinion, most installers have got the install of it more or less figured out. There's not too many considerations, like you don't want to install the equipment right next to a dryer vent. You don't want to install the equipment where you can like see it outside of your window. But so the only like big considerations is like if you do have ice dams, it's like do not install the equipment directly where you have ice dams like forming on your roof because you don't want 100 pounds of ice slamming on the equipment. But yeah, with the outdoor equipment, I think that most of the installer base in Massachusetts really has it pretty well figured out. And it can even be protected. It can be hidden underneath a porch. So a lot of flexibility there.
And the refrigerant lines that go from the compressor to the inside heads can
Yeah.
travel quite a distance, right? You could put
Yeah,
in the, yep.
Yeah, so depending if it's a single zone or a multi-zone, sometimes there's minimum. So typically the minimum is like 12 feet, but with some like the photo on the left-hand side, that person's property, he would have 250 linear feet of like line set length to be working with, to be connecting the outdoor unit to the indoor unit. And on the photo on the right-hand side, it's a really nice install. They like did a nice, they matched the line hide cover with the color of the exterior of the home. But do know that there is also, if you don't want like tons of line hide running around the house on the outside of the house, they also do make contraptions called branch boxes where you can be running from the outdoor unit to a contraption on the inside, and then from the contraption on the inside called the branch box, then you can be running all the ductless equipment off of there. So if you do need, say, 8 indoor units off of one outdoor unit, you don't have like eight line hides, which more or less looks like gutters running along the outside of your house. So some installers can do a really elegant job with getting the equipment installed and commissioned properly.
Great, thanks. So let me talk a little bit about why the heat pumps are so important at this moment in time when we're, we have a state law that the that greenhouse gas emissions have to be reduced to virtually zero by 2050. And in New England, half of our greenhouse emissions, or almost half of our greenhouse gas emissions, come from fossil fuels used in our homes. And heating is by and large the largest source in our homes of greenhouse gases. So um, we need to find ways to get rid of those fossil fuels, and electric heating is at this point just about the only thing that's considered um, greenhouse gas free sort of heating. Um, some wood heating is considered greenhouse gas free, but not really, because there's a lot of emissions from that. So this is a graph from the Mass Clean Energy Center showing the relative greenhouse gas emissions from each of these different types of heating. And you see electric baseboard, oil, propane, and natural gas are all much higher than the air source heat pump, the ground source heat pump, and what they're calling automated wood heating. And note on this natural gas graph, they're not including the fugitive emissions from the wellheads, et cetera, et cetera. So when we green the grid, that is, when all of the electricity is produced by renewable sources, we will see that the electric forms of heat are going to be zero emissions. Um, so that's what we're going toward, and that's why electric heat is so important. And you can green these your electricity sources already if you subscribe to a municipal or a nonprofit program that connects you to 100% clean electricity, which of course our group, Green Energy Consumers, does provide. So that's why heat pumps are really essential at this time, and virtually everyone will have to be moving from these fossil fuel heat systems to electric heat systems over the next 30 years. So let's move on to costs. Installation costs. So costs, there are two major costs. One is the cost of purchasing and installing the system, and the second is operational costs. So first, looking at the installation costs, very rough ballpark, a single head ductless system could be $6,000. Again, take all these numbers with a grain of salt. I don't know your house and what technology would be appropriate, etc. But that gives you an idea. And a centrally ducted system, so if you have ductwork already in your house for heating and possibly the ductwork for your cooling, you can use that for a heat pump, and that would be roughly 15,000 to 25,000 or more. Note that the electrical service very well might need to be upgraded if you don't already have 200 amp service. There is the 0% heat loan, and in the research that we've seen, this works out to be roughly comparable to the cost of installing a fossil fuel heating plus central air. So if you already have central air and a fossil fuel system, you could replace both of those with a heat pump system that provides both heating and cooling. So now on to the operating costs. This graph's a little busy, but it makes some important points. First, look at the kind of gray screen behind the colored lines. That shows you the distribution of hours in the year at certain temperatures. So you see most of the year, that big kind of block of gray on the right side of the graph is occurs between about 32 and 60 degrees, and that happens to be a great temperature for heat pumps to operate in. We do have to, of course, take care of providing heat for the temperatures between freezing and zero or minus, but there are not a lot of hours of the year. Um, then the colored lines show different types of heating. If you start with the yellow line on top, that's your electric resistance. The purple line is propane. The black line is heating oil. The green line is air source heat pump. The blue line is gas, and the orange line is ground source heat pump. Now this here, um, the black line and the green line may be much closer together because of the geopolitics that are wreaking havoc with all of the energy costs, and electric prices are definitely rising, in addition to heating oil costs. But that gives you a sense of the cost breakdown. And if you do have gas heat, you're now wondering, well, why would I get a heat pump? And that really just has to do with the price of gas and the price of electricity. So watch how those prices change over time, and you'll see that um, uh, a heat pump becomes more and more affordable. And even in this set of data, the space between the green lines and the blue lines is virtually nil when you get up to 45 degrees or so. So in that shoulder season, your heat pump would be just as efficient as your gas system. Moving on. So now we're talking about incentives for paying for the thing. Um, and these include significant incentives both in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. If you're integrating a heat pump with a fossil fuel system that you're going to continue to use for that, those very cold days, say, 32 or 45 degrees and colder, then that's what's called the hybrid system or an integrated system. And that's the incentive for that is $1,250 per ton. A ton is 12,000 BTUs of heat. A typical home might need 3 to 5 tons of heat. Larger homes obviously would need more. So it's up to $10,000 for a partial system. These do require a thermostat that connects both the systems, so it's set at a certain temperature to automatically switch from the heat pumps to the fossil fuel. And the technician sets that switchover point, and it's a seamless transition. Now, in Massachusetts, there's now a whole home incentive. So if you're going to get rid of your fossil fuel system, or you can still have it, but it has to be, your heat pump system has to be sized to provide 100% of your heating needs. That incentive is a flat $10,000 per home, and you can get more information about that on the Mass Save website. Gas heat is now included in the whole home incentive. It didn't used to be, so that was a big change in 2022. More on incentives. You could get incentives for the ground source heat pump. That's $15,000 per home for a whole home system. This is more expensive due to the site work that needs to be done on your property, but it is more efficient than air source, as we saw on the graph. So if you do have space and uh, uh, the capital to get into a more expensive installation, that is certainly a good option to explore as well. And some of the ground source companies are now supplying financing, through their own company, so you can get one for zero down with a, obviously with a payment plan. There are also air to water heat pumps. Now, this would take heat out of the air and it would put it into a water tank that would then distribute that hot water through your home. But this isn't a drop-in replacement for your boiler, fortunately. It's most applicable for radiant flooring because the temperature that the heat pump can get that hot water to is not hot enough. It's not comparable to the hot water that comes out of your boiler. It's not boiling. Um, and also there are very few experienced installers doing this hydronic replacement work. So there is an incentive for it, and um, there are people who are doing it, particularly with radiant flooring, um, but it just takes a lot more planning and a lot more work to find a contractor who can work with you. And also on water heaters, there are heat pump water heaters. Again, these are 2 to 3 times more efficient than electric resistance tanks. So if you have an electric resistance tank and you're replacing it, it would be very wise to explore getting a hybrid or a 100% heat pump water heater. They do need adequate space for air exchange. You can't put this in a closet. It has to be, in a fairly large space. It does need electrical wiring, so if you don't currently have a circuit going to your water heater, that would be an additional cost. It does need a condensate drain, and it does make the space colder and drier. So if you had a semi-finished basement, you would want to insulate the wall between the finished part of the basement and the heat pump water heater. And there are incentives for those as well. Now, the big news that we got in August is the Inflation Reduction Act included significant funding for heat pumps. So, for instance, the federal tax credit was and is this year $300 for a heat pump install. In 2023, it will be up to $2,000. So that's great. Plus, there's additional credits for electrical wiring upgrades, and there's now no lifetime cap on how many tax credits you can take for energy efficiency. So you can plan out 10 years worth of energy efficiency work on your home and take that tax credit every year. The federally funded rebates, there are 2 types of those. And I say federally funded because the funding is going to come down to the states, and the states are actually going to administer it. And we don't yet have from the states how they're going to administer that. But just to give you the overview, some of the incentives are for all income levels, and some are for less than 150% of area median income. Now, just to give you a sense of what that is, in the Boston area, that's $200,000 for your household income. Gross household income is 150% of area median income. Again, states may decide to tweak their existing rebates, but Mike just learned today that Massachusetts is not going to do that. So um, at least as far as the tax credit goes. They're not going to reduce that. And there's a great calculator on the Rewiring America site that lets you figure out which IRA measures would be applicable to your home and your household. But just to give you a little more detail very quickly, and then you'll be able to see the details of this when we send out the recording of this webinar. The income qualified rebates are for homes, as I said, up to 150% of area median income. And there's even a greater incentive for households that are below 80% of area median income. There is all sorts of different things that are incentivized: electrical wiring, insulation, electric stove, electric dryer, panel upgrades, etc. Note this can't be combined with other programs. So if you got $10,000 from the state of Massachusetts, you can't also get $8,000 of this federal rebate. Again, the details haven't yet been spelled out, but that's my understanding at this time. The HOMES program is the program that has no income restrictions. So you can be a millionaire and still get these incentives. It is based on your projected energy savings of a total retrofit. So to apply for this, you need to have a professional come to your home, make a proposal. I'm going to do X, Y, and Z for your home. Here's your current energy usage. And after I do X, Y, Z to your home, this is what I project your energy usage would be. So the more energy savings are projected, the higher the level of income, the higher level of incentive that you would qualify for. And this does apply to multifamily buildings and specifically low and moderate income properties qualify for even greater incentives. So this is a great opportunity. Let's move on to system design options. I know we're moving quickly, but we want to have time for questions. Mike, what if a home has ductwork already? Tell us.
Yeah, so I will say with monitoring the questions, there's a lot of questions about ductwork, and we did just really highlight ductless mini splits. Do know that ducted heat pumps are 100% an option. So if you already have, say, central AC, or if you already have a hot air furnace, whether it's propane, oil, or natural gas, there's likely a heat pump solution for you. The heat pump solution could either be one from kind of the same type of manufacturer that made, say, a central AC, which could be like from Carrier or Lennox or Trane, where it would just be a coil that would be sitting right on top of your fossil fuel-based system, and that can work, and that can kind of get you down to well below freezing, really mitigate a lot of fossil fuel use, and provide in many cases, a much more comfortable central AC. There's also, if you do have an existing furnace and you do want to kind of get rid of that oil tank in the basement or get rid of the gas meter outside of your home, they do make centrally ducted air source heat pumps that are completely cold climate, that have enough heating capacity for most average size and okayly insulated homes to get rid of the fossil fuel and switch over to a heat pump. So if you already have ductwork, in a lot of ways, it's a much more straightforward install than if than if your home does not have ductwork, which we'll get to in a second. Some other things that they do just make a note about in that slide is do know that, let's say that your home is 100 years old and your home originally had a coal-fired furnace. There's a good chance that, say, the ductwork that was appropriate for a coal-fired furnace is not going to be super appropriate for a inverter-driven modulating cold climate air source heat pump. So sometimes ductwork does need to be modified to make it work as good as the manufacturer would like it, or to get it properly commissioned. So do know that if you do have ductwork, it's likely going to make the project a bit easier, but there still certainly could be things that the contractor's telling you should do as part of the project as well to make the heat pump more applicable for your home.
Great, thanks. And what about a home that lacks ductwork?
Yeah, so if a home doesn't have ductwork, then there's kind of two different options. So option number one would be doing what I did, where I just kind of took a handful of ductless units and I more or less scattered them around the house, and I sized the equipment to meet my building's heat load. So say, for example, my home is 100 years old, there is no ductwork, so what I ended up doing is I put a ductless unit in more or less every other room. And that was my approach for kind of migrating completely off of natural gas. That is kind of the more affordable option. Other people, their approach may be just putting in one big ductless unit and running the equipment like a wood stove or a pellet stove. Other people may decide if they really like, say, the idea of having a emitter or heat source or a cooling source in each and every room, it may become a matter of, let me actually go and invest in my home. I'll put in a brand new duct distribution system. And then even if you do start off with a boiler, you kind of end up with the same thing that you would have if you did start off with a furnace, with having a ducted system. So in New England, installers are happy to kind of work with you, figure out what your kind of goals are for the project, and come up with an appropriate solution.
Great. Let's move on to some really great examples. Can you walk us through these, Mike?
Yeah, so on this example over here, this would be what I would say would be appropriate for kind of the rugged New Englander. It's not probably the perfect solution for a lot of people where you're just putting in, say, one large ductless unit. This install could cost $6,000, and this could be enough heating horsepower for the entire home. So let's just say that the load is 15,000 BTUs, they put in an 18,000 BTU ductless unit. You just set that thing on to, say, 70 degrees. The family room, the kitchen, the living room area is going to be delightful. And as you migrate further back into the bedrooms in the summertime, depending on how well your home's insulated, depending on the windows, they may feel a little bit warm or a little bit hot. I'm not going to say that that's going to be uncomfortable for everyone. Or say in the winter time, you migrate back into the bedrooms, and on a very cold day, maybe those rooms are feeling cold. And maybe that's not a horrible idea because you like to sleep when it's a bit cooler in the bedrooms. So do know that this is a potential option, but for a lot of homeowners, this is kind of not what an installer is first going to be proposing for the home, but do know that it is a potential option that could be explored if you do really want to kind of keep the budget in check and have a really nice cooling solution and migrate away from fossil fuels.
And this could also be done in conjunction with an existing heating system that, is set so that it comes on if it gets too cold in the bedrooms, etc. Right?
Yeah, it's never been a better year for thermostats than 2022 because now, like all of the major manufacturers with Honeywell, Nest, Ecobee, Lux, they all have like a centrally located Wi-Fi thermostat that kind of remote sensors. So let's just say that the bedrooms do fall below 65 degrees, and 65 degrees is kind of your comfort threshold. Those remote sensors could talk to the main thermostat that's in the same room as the ductless unit. And even though that room's already at 70 degrees, it could cause the central heating system to fire, do a cycle, warm up the bedrooms. The mini split's still happily running. The heating system just ran for 1 or 2 cycles overnight. So yeah, there's a lot of kind of good ways that could get configured.
Great. And for another example.
Yeah, this is what we're trying to, this is where I think I come in the most helpful if you are kind of thinking that you're going to have a potentially ductless project or that's what you're most interested in. There's a real consequence to, say, the efficiency of the system with oversizing. So on the previous one, I said, imagine that the heat load was 15,000 BTUs. Let's say that you do want 4 indoor units. The smallest indoor unit, the smallest multi-zone that supports, say, like 4 indoor units is 36,000 BTUs. So just by the sake of like wanting a ductless unit in each and every room, now you've kind of doubled the size of the outdoor equipment. And when the heat load is so oversized, or when the equipment is so oversized versus the space that it's supposed to be going in, it does have a real impact on how efficient the equipment runs. And what I mean by that is, say that you were thinking that your heating expenditures was going to be $2,000 over the course of the winter. If you oversize it by, say, 50% or 100%, you very well could end up with energy expenditures that'd be closer to like $2,500 or $3,000, depending on the manufacturer. So with so sometimes there's a real penalty for kind of going with this approach. The other thing that I will say about this approach as well was the previous install probably cost about $6,000. This install is going to be costing like $22,000 or $20,000. There's it's going to quickly, and this is just like a small studio that we're looking at. So just picture this as 2 stories. You know, now we're up to 8 indoor units. Now it's $40,000 for the equipment. So I do just try to steer people away from this. One, it affects efficiency. Two, it kind of creates these proposals that some people can afford, but lots of people can't afford, even with all the great incentives and tax credits. And yeah, so I do just think that like if you are designing with ductless, it's really important to be asking for an accurate heat load calculation from the contractor, because once you have that, then these types of installs don't happen with kind of oversized equipment.
Great, and that is definitely one of the things that's included when Abode does a quote comparison. They'll rate it in terms of the sizing of the equipment. And now the perfect porridge for Goldilocks. Tell us about this one.
Yeah, so this is kind of what we're always trying to kind of guide people towards. So let's just say hypothetically that the heat load is say 15,000 BTUs per hour still. You could have a 9,000 BTU ductless unit in the living room servicing the living room, kitchen, dining room. And then you could have a 6,000 BTU ducted unit up in the attic or down in the basement and having registers in the floor coming up servicing the 2 bedrooms in the bathroom. And I can say that this is the type of install that ends up with having a coefficient of performance of or close to 3 or being nearly 300% efficient. It would enable you to have like the common area to be on its own zone, as well as the 2 bedrooms to be on their own zone. So if you did like to say sleep in say 65-degree weather and you like the common area to be 70 degrees, this would be what would enable you to do it. And as far as pricing goes, I do think that most of the time I'm seeing like a small slim duct unit. I'm seeing that at like $10,000. The ductless unit's $6,000. So it does come in, you know, $15,000, $16,000 for this type of setup. But I can say that the equipment's going to be running really, really well as in terms of efficiency. In cooling mode, everything's going to be dry. It's going to be comfortable. Nothing's going to feel cold or clammy or humid. Yeah, so, and you can even be adding, you know, adding features to especially the ducted system that could be used to really be improving the indoor air quality of the home as well. So that's really what we're trying to promote. But with any consultation that we're ever conducting, it really does kind of start off with just trying to think about long-term goals for the home, potential budget, what you're hoping to accomplish. And depending on that, you know, the perfect system could look wildly different than this as well.
Right, each home is unique.
Yeah.
So just to recap, our program with Abode allows you to get referrals to trusted heat pump installers for free. You can get the independent quote comparison at a discounted fee of $50. You can get the independent virtual consultations with Mike, or another building science expert, for a discounted fee of $100. And you can sign up for all of this at our website. You do need to come in through our website to qualify for these discounts, and the discounts are going to be disappearing. So sign up soon. You know, you can still get the services, but they won't be quite this remarkably cheap. I just want to point out the quote comparison tool because I love it so much. It really allows you to have that side-by-side comparison on all sorts of variables and really clear explanations of the technical information. This is just one little slice from it, this graphic showing the cost per ton and how the three different systems stack up on a cost per ton basis. So I really love that cost comparison, that quick comparison tool. So just in closing, we do have lots of webinars, and you can always find those at greenenergyconsumers.org/events. And you can find our recorded webinars on YouTube, and we will be sending you a link to the recording of this event. And we encourage you to donate. We are a nonprofit, and we have wonderful programs that are really driving the transition to a fossil fuel-free future. And we're happy to take a few questions. Mike, have you seen anything that's good to share if you've been monitoring those questions?
Yeah, there's been a lot of questions that have come in and more than I can type, but I'm happy to just read off the question, provide a quick 1-minute answer, and we can see how many that we can kind of get through, if that sounds good.
Sure.
Or Loie, you're also happy. I'd be more than happy to also have you as the MC, looking for the best questions.
You start in because I haven't looked at them myself yet.
Okay, so with Jacqueline, she writes, what do heat pumps look like in high density housing? So there's different types of heat pumps. One of them is called VRF, variable refrigerant flow. And instead of being, say, like a 4-ton system, they would be like a 60-ton system or a 10-ton system. So it's much bigger outdoor units, but it's the exact same concepts. But also if you do go into Asia or Europe and you're seeing an apartment building or a high rise over there, like everyone has a little ductless unit, outdoor unit on their balcony. What would I recommend for a 1,700 square foot home? I would recommend an accurate heat load calculation. So that's where you need to start with asking your contractor. Do you know that, say, a home could need anywhere between, say, like 5 BTUs per square foot if it's like a passive house, or it could need 50 BTUs per square foot if it's an uninsulated barn that can't be insulated. So I don't have any, that you first need to figure out what the heat load is before you can be thinking about equipment. I can say for my own 100-year-old home, I needed roughly 22 BTUs per square foot, so I could have just gone by with like one big multi-zone. As a renter, what can I do to encourage my landlord to install a heat pump? It's a good question. I would say start with letting them know about Mass Save because renters can get 100% off insulation, and the energy auditor could be a good advocate for you to help you kind of install a heat pump as well. Do you know that there is also moderate income incentives where maybe that could also jump the incentive for a whole home heat pump from like $10,000 for a moderate income resident, then it jumps up to $16,000. So as a renter, one of your potential ways to help your landlord migrate over there is just letting them know that it's like really good incentive. It's brand new mechanicals for the home. Homes that have delightful cooling systems, he or she or they can also probably end up getting a bit more in rent as well. So it is an investment into their property. But one of the things that I can say for renters that landlords are always concerned about is just with maintenance of the equipment, with just making sure that someone's out there changing the filters.
I see there's a question about municipal light and power and the incentives for those.
Yeah, so if you're paying an investor-owned utility, let's say National Grid or Eversource for natural gas, then you're eligible for all the Mass Save incentives. If you don't, if you're not paying an investor-owned utility, then you would need to be checking with your local municipal light plant to see what they're offering for heat pump rebates. The company I work for, Abode, we're managing a handful of the programs, and I can say that a lot of the municipal light plants have done a good job of trying to compete or match what Mass Save is offering. But I can also just state that a lot of municipal light plants have much lower electric rates than the investor-owned utilities. So while the rebates may not be as good, the operating cost, it becomes a lot more favorable.
Mike, I see a question about somebody who installed a heat pump system uh, to augment their oil steam boiler 4 years ago, and they're wondering if they upgrade to eliminate the oil entirely, would they be eligible for mass save rebates? Am I correct that they would be eligible for the partial but not the whole home?
Yeah, so it will require a little bit of work on the back end, but we have gotten confirmation from Mass Save and their rebate processor that if you have claimed a previous rebate from Mass Save and you are pursuing a whole home heat pump rebate, they will pay out the whole home net what they paid out on a previous rebate. So say for my own home, when I put in my heat pumps, I had natural gas for heat. So I only ended up getting a $625 rebate. So if I were to then say pursue the whole home rebate, I'd be getting 9,000 back instead of, the $1,250 per ton. But yeah, if there is kind of some, I don't want to just provide the email address, but if there is this like nuance, do know that like hvac@masssave.com is a potential resource for helping you kind of navigate the Mass Save rebate program. And also, I think that's why Green Energy Consumer Alliance is working with Abode, because I can also help people navigate these kind of tricky situations.
I see a question, do I still need to have my oil boiler as backup on extreme cold nights?
Yeah, so it's a tricky question and every home is different. So let's just say that you have an oil boiler. Um, the and let's say that it's 0 degrees outside and you design a heat pump system to meet 100% of the building's heat load. No, you don't need to maintain your oil boiler. But weird things happen weather-wise. Okay, so polar vortexes are real, snow apocalypses are real. So all installers are supposed to be designing a heat pump system to meet the heat load. And in Massachusetts, the heat load is always going to be above 0 degrees. So 99.9% of the winter, it is above 0 degrees. However, weird weather events do happen. So let's just say it was negative 15 degrees overnight, and it was like that for 12 hours straight. You wake up, the heat pump hasn't kept up. One thing to know is when it's not keeping up, it doesn't turn off. It's just not keeping up. So instead of waking up to a house that's 70 degrees, you're going to wake up to a home that's 68 degrees or 66 degrees or 64 degrees. The sun comes up, it warms up outside, your home's benefiting from radiant energy, there's more energy in the outside air, the heat pump's going to get your home back up to 70 degrees. So it is kind of a preference. The other thing that I will keep in mind is do know that store-bought electric space heaters are real. Every store-bought electric space heater, like the standard model, can be dumping in about 5,000 BTUs per hour. So it is very likely that the difference of the heat pump not keeping up when it's like negative 15 degrees outside is probably the same difference that a $20 store-bought space heater would be able to make up the difference. But yeah, lots of different thoughts over there about it, and every home's going to be different with different loads.
Right. There's somebody who notes that if you convert from fossil fuel heating to electric heating, then you can get the residential heating rate from your utility, which is going to be less expensive than the electric rate for those homes that don't heat with electricity. So you can build that into your calculations.
Yeah, do you know that right now National Grid they don't have a separate electric heating
Hmm.
rate, and with Eversource it is within the margin. It's like 0.00 to like cents difference. So that's not as much as it was in the past.
Mm.
Um, but I am happy to talk potential strategies of other ways that you could be kind of potentially lowering your rate with really thinking about, is there any opportunity to be pairing on-site renewables with your heat pump? Because that's really kind of like the best way to win as far as what your energy expenditures are here in Massachusetts.
Somebody asked, what about an extended power outage?
Yep, same thing that would happen with your oil-fired boiler or natural gas-fired furnace. Nothing would be running. So with all heating systems that have been manufactured in the last 50 years, they all require electricity to power a circulator or power a pit fan or power a pump or to power a heat pump. So it's not going to be any different than any of the existing systems. What I will be happy to concede is that, let's say that you do have a Tesla Powerwall or you have a Generac generator in your yard, it's a lot easier to power, say, a circulator pump than it is to power a heat pump, or it's a lot easier to power a blower motor on a natural gas furnace than a heat pump. But it's nothing that can't be designed again. So if you are interested in running your heat pump off of a backup Generac generator, that 100% could be a reality in, say, 2022.
And some people also are considering, if you live in a home where you could install a wood stove,
Yep.
having that wood stove as your backup for power outage.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah,
I want to take one because I see a question that I'd like to
yeah.
touch on. Is Mitsubishi seems to be the gold standard for heat pump brands. In your opinion, is Fujitsu or other brands just as good? I can say that for my own heat pump project, I went with Fujitsu, so I'm slightly biased. But I will say this, having a year later or 2 years later now living with it, every single manufacturer and every single model, whether indoor or outdoor equipment, single zone, multi-zone, they all perform differently. And even with like Mitsubishi's equipment, which is really good and rock solid, like their ducted like commercial series, their ducted residential series doesn't qualify for mass save rebates, only their light commercial one does. So it really is like, if there's a value of the quote comparison report that we do, not to like sell about in our services, the quote comparison report, we model the performance of the heat pump at different temperature ranges over kind of the performance of your home. And we really can kind of determine exactly which piece of equipment is going to be most suitable. The one thing that I will say, in addition to this, is just make sure that if you are going with any type of heat pump, I would recommend just going from a brand that you have seen of or heard of before. So Mitsubishi, Fujitsu, LG, Daikin, those are all kind of like the standard ones in our region. But say today I was looking at a proposal from Cooper and Hunter, and I've seen other ones from Gree, and it's like these contractors just don't have a huge market share in Massachusetts. So I do have a huge concern about just parts and services. So I don't tell people to like go for the lowest price or anything like that, but it's kind of always like go for the best performing equipment from a reputable installer, is typically kind of my approach on selecting equipment.
Great. Here's one about ductwork. I have a oil-fired hot air furnace. I was told I couldn't use the ductwork for AC because condensation would be a problem. What do you?
Yeah, so let's just say that you do have an oil-fired furnace that's down in the basement and the ductwork is uninsulated and you're running it as AC, the air inside of the ducts is going to be cold. So the outside of the ductwork, which is metal, is going to become a condensing surface and it become dripping wet and it rust it out. So one of the things that most installers are doing is say that down in the basement, all of the ductwork is going to get sealed and insulated, and then the ductwork that's inside of the home, like as it is kind of running up into the walls and into the chases of the home, that's where they kind of seal it off. So it's not just kind of constantly exposed to that warm, moist basement air. So yeah, sometimes going back to what I said about like coal-fired furnace, the ductwork may need to be modified. Same thing if any ductwork is in an unconditioned basement, you are going to want to make sure that it's insulated and sealed. So, but
Great.
yeah.
I think we should probably cap the questions now since we're over an hour now. But please feel free to write to me, Loie, L-O-I-E, at greenenergyconsumers.org, and I will forward your questions on to Mike if they're technical ones that I can't answer. And everybody will be getting a copy of the recording, and we look forward to talking with you when you want to reach out to us. So thanks very much for coming.
Thanks all.